All right, here we go. Good evening, everybody. Special night tonight. I hope you know why. We said it earlier. It is the yahrzeit, the anniversary passing of Moshe Rabbeinu. You might say, well, it's his birthday as well, right? We know that his birthday and his yahrzeit, he passed away exactly 120 years old. But we have, since it's a leap year this year, the Gemara concludes, without getting into much detail, that the main Adar is the second Adar. That's why we have Purim in the second Adar. So seemingly we should also celebrate the yahrzeit in the second Adar. Why do we celebrate yahrzeits in the first Adar? Tonight, we're not wishing Moshe happy birthday. We're wishing him, Olav Shalom, Shev and Aliyah, Neshama Shev and Aliyah. Because there's a concept, halacha actually talks about this and says, really, we should be celebrating it in the second. But because we have this concept of zerizim lamakdim lemitzvahs, we do mitzvahs with alacrity, as quickly as we possibly can. And there's a mitzvah to say Kaddish for one who's passed away. You should light a yahrzeit candle. Therefore, we do it in the first Adar to take advantage, to do it with alacrity. And you might say, what about Purim? Okay, the Gemara does discuss that, but the main mitzvah is really, the main Adar is the second Adar. And in truth, in actuality, we commemorate a yahrzeit this Adar. There are no bar mitzvahs in this Adar. The rabbi loves to say, he always loves to say this. In the world right now, there are no bar mitzvahs going on in the first month of Adar. At least there shouldn't be. We do it in the second Adar. Him and his wife got married. No, I'm sorry. His mother passed away in Adar. So he will be saying Kaddish next week or in 2 weeks from now, but he'll also be saying Kaddish again in Adar, the second Adar. But he really focuses on this Adar. This Adar, that's when he gives like his, Kiddush donation. And we say Kelam Ali Rachamim, the special prayer that we say for Neshama on a yahrzeit, a soul on a yahrzeit. And he likes to say, this is when I gave cake and whiskey. So we really celebrate. Yahrzeits are reserved for this Adar. Moshe Rabbeinu passed away exactly 120 years old. He passed away on Mount Nivoy, Har Nivoy. We don't exactly know where he's buried, and that was done by design. The last 37 days of his life, he wrote the entire book of Devarim. That was his last will and testament. He passed away, it says, with a neshika, with a kiss from God. He saw his brother Aaron, how his brother Aaron passed away a few years prior. And he said, that's the way I want to go as well. And the Talmud, or the Zohar, I believe, describes what happens to the neshama when it passes away. It leaves the body through a kiss from God. And the parable that it gives, the parable that it gives is, imagine an eyelash on white milk, and you take away the eyelash. You remove the eyelash from the milk, how smooth it is, and how there's just no it's like a slight ripple. It's an interesting image. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu, that's what it was like when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. The Yidden, we mourned for him for 40 days, which is unique. We mourned for him for 40 days, but there was also a little bit of comfort in that Moshe already appointed Joshua, to be his successor. It says that one sun doesn't rise before the previous sun has set, but yet the sun is already set into motion. In other words, the new sun will be set into motion. Sun meaning S-U-N. So Yeshua was already there. Yeshua actually says that the part of Moshe's spirit, Moshe's character traits, Moshe's spiritual makeup was given over to Yeshua, albeit on a little bit of a more muted level. So we ask for Moshe, we call Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, to come, and hopefully we'll see him soon. With the coming of Mashiach may take place immediately. Okay, something very interesting. This parsha, it's kind of hard for me to say. It is my bar mitzvah parsha, which means I read this week's parsha for my bar mitzvah. But my bar mitzvah, I really had turned 13 3 weeks prior. There was a snowstorm and my parents pushed it off. So although I was bar mitzvah at Parshas Bo, but I actually read the Haftorah and I read from the Torah in this week's Parsha. So I feel a special connection to this week's Parsha, which is interestingly enough, this Parsha does not mention Moses' name even once. What's the backstory? As we said earlier today, when Moses came down after 40 days from the mountain, getting the Torah from God, the tablets, he came down and he saw very few Jews and a lot of what's called the Erev Rav, a lot of like aristocratic Egyptians and magicians and people who jumped on the bandwagon, not Jewish, come along with the Jews. And what were they doing? They were worshiping a golden calf. Very few Jews, by the way. Nevertheless, God got very angry, and Moses realized that I got to do something about this, and he smashed the tablets on the ground. And God said at the end of this, at the end of Devarim, it says the last Rashi says that God, what gave God the most pleasure throughout the 40 years in the desert? What was the most pleasurable part? When Moses threw the tablets onto the ground and broke them, and which is seemingly bizarre, but Rashi explains. Moses threw the contract, so to speak. He ripped up the contract. In the contract, it says if you serve, in this case, the Torah, if you serve idols, then I will destroy you. And before we were able to look at the contract, so to speak, Moses was just delivering the contract. He smashed it on the ground. He ripped it up and was like, we didn't sign anything yet, so you can't destroy us. And God wanted to destroy us. And Moses said, God said to Moses, I will destroy this people and I will build another nation from you. So don't worry, you won't lose out. And Moses said, if you destroy these people, erase me from your book. I want nothing to do with this. I want nothing to do with you. These are my people. It showed his dedication to his people. He saw us as his people. God said, fine, I'm not going to destroy them. If that's the case, I'm not going to destroy them. But the words of a tzaddik, the words of a righteous person, and not just a righteous person, but any person, has an effect upon the world. And therefore, since Moses said, erase me from your book, those words came out of his mouth. They eventually came into fruition. And it expressed itself in this week's Parsha. Moses' name, God just refers to Moses as you. We see another similar concept like we spoke about earlier. We spoke about a few Parshias ago that I just find it fascinating. So I mention it all the time. When Moses wanted to marry Zipporah, his wife, so he went to Zipporah's father, Yisro, and he said, I want to marry your wife, and your daughter. And Yisro said, fine, on one condition, the first son will be an idol worshiper. And he'll worship all the idols in the world. So Moses said, all right, I got enough time to convince you. Don't worry about it. I'm not so worried about it. Fine, you can, my first son will be an idol worshiper as long as I can marry your daughter. And it happened. And Moses actually convinced his father-in-law at some point. He didn't really have to convince him. Yisro came to the conclusion that God is the true God. And therefore he was like, you don't have to, your firstborn son doesn't have to serve idols. Nevertheless, because Moses had made such a statement, his grandson Yonasan was a pagan priest. And we also know that the Moses' children were not of the highest caliber. Was this after the Chet Egel? Okay, so this story, there's no chronological order in the Torah. This story all takes place after the sin of the golden calf, obviously, yes. But we haven't had the sin of the golden calf yet, right? We will. The Torah is not in chronological order, but we'll get all into this very soon. Very good question. Okay, so this Torah portion really speaks about the garments of the Kohen Gadol. And I just want to mention one thing really quickly. The Baal HaTurim, who speaks about the fact that Moses' name doesn't appear, except the only time we don't see this Moses' name not being in the Parsha is in Deuteronomy. The reason is that, like we spoke about before, but the Rebbe explains that Moses' self-sacrifice, his action caused him to be elevated to a level beyond a name. A name, according to Chassidus, is something very external. Yeah. Although I haven't really met too many other people with the name Elia, but Joseph, many people named John, Frankie. Yeah, a lot of people can have the same name. So it's something very external. And we know in Chassidus it connects with the essence as well. But Moses was elevated beyond name. You only need a name when somebody else is in the room, somebody else to relate to you. I don't call myself, I don't speak to myself in the third person. Elia says, you don't need a name. Moses' self-sacrifice raised him above this concept of name, that God referred to him only as to his essence. He reached this quintessential self, says the Rebbe, this level of self that cannot be captured by any name or any designation, and it's internalized by the Torah in the Torah, and that's something very powerful. So it talks off. What's the first opening lines? Teztaveh, Moses, you shall command the Jewish people to bring to you olive oil. We're going to talk a little bit about the menorah, the Balaturim, not the Balaturim. I'm sorry, the Orachaim. The Orachaim, Moshe ben Eter, who lived in Morocco. Then he had to leave, and he went to Israel. He was a major Kabbalist, lived in the same times as the Baal Shem Tov. Major commentary on the Torah, very beloved in Chassidus. He was a Moroccan. He was a Sephardi. He was a Talmud. He had his commentary on the Talmud, on the Chumash, a lot of stuff on Kabbalah. It actually says that one Shabbos, the Baal Shem Tov, who lived in Ukraine, was sitting around with his Chassidim, and all of a sudden the Baal Shem Tov looks up and he says, "The light of the West just went out," and they had no idea what he was talking about. And finally, word reached them weeks later that the Orachaim had passed away. So the Alter Rebbe, the Orachaim, he has an interesting. The Teztaveh is a very famous line. The word mitzvah, the Teztaveh, and you shall command. The word mitzvah shares the same root letters as tzavtzah, which means connection. What does a mitzvah do? A mitzvah connects us with God. It creates a bond between us and God. And that is carried out through Moses. The Moses of the generation is able to bind us with God, which is something unique. There is a Moses of every generation who tells us what our mission is, what's our emphasis of the generation in order to bring Mashiach. So what does it say? You shall bring, the opening lines, it says, they shall bring to you pure olive oil, and to be an everlasting lamp, that it should be lit everlasting, something eternal, from evening to morning. Now, something grammatically incorrect. God says to Moses, they should bring to you olive oil to put in the menorah, so that the menorah will be everlasting, and you got to light it from evening to morning. So Chassidus loves to emphasize such a thing, loves to zone in. There's a bit of a paradox over here. Is it everlasting, or is it evening to morning? In other words, there's two things going on over here. The concept of perpetuality, of continuation, that we find by the menorah, and yet we see evening to morning. It should be lit from evening to morning, something temporary. So we see this concept of eternality, something eternal. That's a word, eternality. Did I just make that up? To me, this should be continuous, forever, and yet also evening and morning. And Chassidus loves this. And Chassidus says this is our job in life. Our job in life is to emphasize, is to take the eternality, the non-finiteness, the infinitude, as I often find in the words in the English translations, the infinitude of Torah, something that lasts eternal, it's beyond space and time, and bring it into the evening and the morning. In other words, the time and space. That we're not here to overwhelm the world. We're not here to to influence somebody in a way that completely nullifies them. You got to just do it like this. No, you have to speak. When you speak to someone, you got to speak to them on their terms. You have to deal with things as they are in this life. You have to see the holiness in a mortgage payment. You have to see the holiness in driving a car. There's something divine in it. It's just as divine as the Torah. Now, the only problem is it's not as transparent as Shabbos, praying on Shabbos. It's not as transparent as Jerusalem. Detroit, Michigan, where I live, Ain't no Jerusalem, but it's really there's a holiness in truth. They're the same level of holiness. My job, or along with other people, is to bring the light and to express. How do we find the divinity in Detroit itself, wherever we are, in this cup, and everything like that, to bring it out, not to overwhelm it, but to find the divinity, the transparency, the kedusha, the holiness in everything finite. It's a classic concept in Chassidus. You got to bring pure olive oil. So we're going to speak a little bit about the olive, the oil, which is Chassidus is often referred to as oil. What's unique about oil? Oil rises to the top. You put oil and water, they don't mix, right? Oh, they get together like oil and water. Classic line. Why oil always raises that? It actually permeates everything and rises to the top, which is very much like Chassidus. It always rises to the top. It always permeates through everything and then brings it up to the surface. It shines light. It brings everything up. But what is unique about olive oil? Olive oil only yields light when it's pounded. And so are man's greatest potentials, like we see in Purim, they're only realized under such conditions. Only when we go through, everyone can appreciate this. When we go through times of crushing, as long as you're able to get through it, it brings out a much greater and deeper part of you. Oil and wine are something unique. I don't really know a practical application of this, but in Halacha it talks about this. Oil and wine are the only two elements, or the only two liquids, the only two foods in the world, in creation, where the bracha, the blessing, when they're crushed and they become a liquid, their status is elevated. For example, a grape, the bracha on a grape is borei pri ha'etz, fruit of the, which is the same bracha as we'd say on an orange or an apple. But when you crush it and you have wine that comes out, it has a whole new status, borei pri hagafen, and even it's an elevated status according to halacha. Same thing with oil. Oil is also borei, an olive is borei pri ha'etz, but when you crush it, it has a special bracha. You have to mix it. I've never done it before. You have to mix it into something else, and it has its own status. In other words, it has its own bracha, and because of that, it becomes elevated. It has its own elevated state. Something unique about olives and wine. It's in Gemara Brachas. I have to look it up. I forgot. I just thought of it right now. There was an old Hasidic saying that when a person, what happens is you should crush the olive oil. You should crush the olives, and it'll create olive oil for light. You'll get light when you crush the olives. Comes out olive oil, and then you can create light. So Chassidim used to say, we don't hurt somebody. We don't try to hurt someone else's feelings. When you want to say something that a person really needs to hear, and it might crush them, we don't crush them for the sake of crushing them. We crush them in order to illuminate them. It shouldn't be enough that you leave them there feeling bad, but they should feel elevated and illuminated after you say something. We're not here to humiliate them or break them. We're here to illuminate them. Classic Hasidic saying. All right, so let's go a little bit into over here we have the garments. The Torah portion moves on, and we have the garments of the Kohen Gadol. So the Kohen Gadol wore 8 garments, unlike a regular Kohen who wore 4 garments. You might think, by the way, wow, to live the life of a Kohen Gadol must be amazing. I think it's like terrible. I don't know how to say this. It's like horrible. Basically, the Kohen Gadol can never leave the Beis HaMikdash. He has to wear very heavy. Over here he has the choshen. He wore very heavy garments. He had to carry a lot of things. He walked around barefoot the entire day. He got sick. This guy has no feet. He has no shoes. Yeah, he's got no socks on. He's got no shoes on. He was very wealthy, but he spent it on, only certain things. Now, I'm sure he obviously enjoyed it. And that's probably why I'm not a Levite or a Kohen. But it was a very tough life. And they had to, they could retire when they wanted to retire, but they held the position on for at least, it seems at least like 30 years, 30 to 60 years. No joke. So here we have a few of the garments that we'll get into. Starting with the Torah goes right into the ephod. So he shall make an ephod. What is the ephod? What is the ephod? So the ephod is this thing right here, is this robe. And Rashi has a very interesting explanation of what the ephod is. Rashi wasn't exactly sure. I'm sorry, this is the ephod. No, it's not the ephod. The ephod is a... No, this is wrong. When I was looking for an explanation, they gave me a lot of like non-Jewish sites. Okay, the ephod is this actually. It's underneath here, and it looks like an interesting robe. So Rashi explains like this. Rashi says, I don't exactly know what the ephod is. I don't know what it looks like, but I would say it looks like those robes that aristocratic women use to ride on horses. What's the story? The story is like a very interesting story. Rashi was obviously the tzaddik of his generation. His head was stuck in the books. And one day, for whatever reason, he looked up out of his window and he saw a woman riding on a horse. And he was very distraught because looking at a woman riding a horse is not exactly very modest. And he was very distraught throughout the day. And he said, why would God make it so that I would see a woman riding a horse? And he was studying this week's Parsha, and he was writing his commentary for this week's Parsha. And it came to the ephod, and he realized, and this is what he says, it came up in my heart to think that it's these robes that the women wear, the aristocratic women wear when they're riding horses, that it was divine providence. He looked at this woman and he saw that she was wearing this robe, this riding robe. And he said, that is what the Kohen Gadol would wear in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. For the ephod, the Baal Shem Tov says that everything a person sees or hears has to be a lesson in avodas Hashem and in service of God, and that was the key. Now he understood why God made it so. He never in his life did he ever look up, or did he just look around, not like the rest of us. Right? Yeah, he looked around and he saw something very immodest. And with that, it was a very unusual thing for Rashi to write. And therefore we see that is the ephod. So you can't really see it because the ephod is really in the back, but it's those things that women wear, or I think like cowboys even wear them, or everybody that rides them, like those, it's like those leather aprons. It's an apron, essentially. It's a leather apron. So that was the ephod. Moving on into the Parsha. Let's see over here. Moving on to Parsha. We have the breastplate. Here we go, the Choshen. So here, there's actually a lot of things going on in this little breastplate. It has, the breastplate really is the outer part, now with the stones. The inside the breastplate, there is written something called the Urimentum, which is another mitzvah. The Urimentum was a piece of cloth that had God's name written on it that they would use to consult with. The Urimentum was called the Breastplate of Judgment. Why was this whole thing called the Breastplate of Judgment? Because if they wanted to go to war, they would seek counsel from the Urimentum, and they would walk up to it and they would say, should we go to war or not? And it would light up either saying yes or no. And this only worked up until the first Beis Hamikdash, up until the first temple. It did not exist in the second temple. They had the garment, but it didn't work because there was a lower level of divinity. And that's why, by the way, because there was this lower level of divinity, after the destruction of the first temple, most of the Jews did not want to go back to Israel. During the times of Purim, which took place in Babylonia, there was Ezra. Ezra lived there at the time, and the whole miracle happened. And Ezra said, everybody, let's go back to Israel and let's build the second temple. And most of them said, no, we're not going back. And they didn't. I think he only went back with 30,000 people. Some say 60,000. Very small amount. Most of the Jews continued to live in Bavel for the next 1,000 years. In fact, the Jews, Bavel is in Iraq and Iran. The Jews have been living in Iran until the Shah was taken over in 1982. They had been living there since the destruction of the first temple, since the times of Purim. They had been living there. So how devastating it is that when they got kicked out. So they would consult with this breastplate over here. And it's not exactly clear where it was, where the clef, where that piece of clef was, where God's name was, but it was somewhere tucked underneath here. And here we have these gemstones, each of them had a, which is this is the Choshen, which is the, each of the names of the tribes are written upon them, and each had their own little color. And if you want to know some of the colors, Yehuda, tribe Judah was Carolina. It was a sky blue, was the light blue, like the color of the sky. You had Binyamin, which had all of the colors. He was over here. He had all the colors. Shimon was green. It goes into a whole bunch. In fact, I think it even goes into it over here. This was attached to the ephod, and the ephod really only was, once we spoke, the robe part was only in the back, and it was attached to the Choshen, which was right here. The significance of that, according to Chassidus, is that the top parts of ourselves, the parts that are more elevated, should not be excluded from the lower parts of ourselves. Again, this concept of the higher and lower, the mundane and the supernal, should always remain connected. Because the ephod was in the back below the waist. The breastplate again was on the upper part. And the Urim and Tumim, what's the definition of Urim and Tumim? The illuminator and the verifier. The Urim and Tumim was also used to decide which tribe would live where. You ever seen? It's not like I've really seen it, but I saw a clip from Harry Potter. Yeah, they had this little hat that would tell you from which house you had to be in. I guess, I don't know. Never saw it, but it was.
Maybe they took it from Torah.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was getting at. No, I would assume. I mean, that is a great way of explaining it. You basically consulted with it, and it told you, it could tell you where exactly which part of land you should live and which house you should have. It's quite interesting. The question is, why are the sections dealing with sacrifices, which we spoke about, which we will talk about, sacrifices and priestly garments? Why do things in order? Why is the Torah in a certain order? Yeah, we're very careful. As I always say, the Torah is not written, it's not Charles Dickens. You don't get paid by the word. Everything is precise, and there's nothing extraneous, nothing extra. So why is the Parsha of sacrifices, which we're going to talk about later on, why is it together with the garments? Speaking about the garments, because just as sacrifices bring atonement, so do the garments. And what do each one of them do? I'm not going to get into all of them, but we have over here, let's say, the me'il. The me'il is this long robe over here, and it says about the me'il that the tunic, that it atones for bloodshed. Why? Because it says about Joseph, they took his tunic, his me'il, they took his tunic. Well, I didn't say me'il, but they took his tunic and they dipped it in blood as a sacrifice, right? Because that's what they used to trick their father. So it rectifies that sin. You have the michnasaim over here, the pants, which are, what does it say? It says later on in the Torah, you shall make pants to cover the flesh of their nakedness. So it deals with lewdness. It brings atonement for lewdness. The turban over here, the magbas. So the Kohen Gadol had a very high one. This is actually a little bit incorrect. And they usually draw it this way, and it's a problem. I'll tell you why in a second. The migbas, which is the big turban, what does that atone for? It says the Torah, arrogance. It shall be placed high upon the head to silence the haughty one. So it deals with arrogance, which is interesting because it's very high up, like haughtiness. But the Kohen, a regular Kohen, had a more flat turban, and the Kohen Gadol had a very high turban, as we see over here. But you'll see there was actually a space between this hat and this thing called the tzitz, which I'll talk about in a second. But there was a little space. Why was there a little space? For the tefillin to go. Back in the day, we would wear tefillin all day. Men would wear tefillin all day. And it was in between these two spots. So you can imagine, you wear tefillin all day, you have this heavy garments. It wasn't exactly the most, I don't know, not a desirable life I must say, for me. This is called the tzitz, a very fascinating Gemara in Sukkah, where they talk about this little thing written over here. It says Kodesh la Hashem. It says the Torah you should write on the tzitz, which is like this plate. It was like a tiara almost. I don't know other way to describe it. It says Kodesh la Hashem, holy to God. That's what's written on it. And there was a big argument in the Torah, in the Talmud. Was Kodesh, was it written on one line or was it written on two lines? Kodesh la Hashem, holy to God. So they had the whole back and forth and trying to bring proofs from the Torah. And then somebody comes in and says, I went to the Vatican where they had it. Everything is stored. He said, I went to the Vatican. In the cellars of the Vatican, they hold all of the stuff that they've plundered, all the booty that they've taken. And I was shown the tzitz, and it says it on one line. But I believe the conclusion of the Gemara was that sometimes it was written on one line, sometimes it was written on two, but for sure it was definitely written on one line. Very interesting little factoid, that a proof from the Torah that the Vatican holds a lot of our stuff. Which, by the way, I want to mention very quickly. What was the shape of the menorah? Chabad makes a really big deal about it. The Temple Institute, which is a organization in Israel, if you ever go to Jerusalem, it's very cool. I would highly recommend to go check it out. They've actually made all of the utensils for the Holy Temple. And they made it in a very pure way, according to them. They've made it in a very pure way. You can actually see it. You can't touch it, but it's all prepared. Why did they make it? Because if Mashiach were to come, we don't have to wait. When Mashiach comes, this way we don't have to wait to build all of the stuff. All the utensils, all the things that we need. You can see the choshen. They have like a choshen over there. Mashiach can just come, grab it. The Kohen Gadol can just come and grab everything, and we can right away start working in the Beis Hamikdash. Now, obviously, there's a bit of controversy. Millions of dollars were poured into it, but it's whatever side you're on, it's all good. It's super cool, and you can go check it out. Now, one of the things they have over there that is not held inside their vault, not held inside their institution, is the famous menorah. If you walk in the old city of Jerusalem, you'll see it's in a super plexiglass case. But the way it's designed is according to the design on the Arch of Titus. If you look at the Arch of Titus, you'll see it's very famous. It shows Jewish people being, bound, whatever. We're all slaves, and they're carrying a menorah, and it's curved like this. Now, the Rambam holds, Maimonides holds, 11th century sage, holds that it was diagonal. And he has a drawing of it. And that is the way the Lubavitcher Rebbe holds, that it is according to the diagonal, according to the way of the Rambam, not according to the way of Titus. And so we have a bit of an issue in the with the way the Temple Institute made it, and they know it. And they'll always say, whether we're right or not, they're both kosher, which is true. The way they made it is kosher for the temple. That design is kosher and fine. But I thought you guys would like to know that. Moving on, we have over here. So we have the choshen. We have this called the avnate, which is the sash. This thing was 48 feet long. It had to be wrapped around 36 times. That's why we have a gartel. I don't have my gartel with me. Yeah, we wear a gartel nowadays. I see like priests. I go to the old city. The only time I ever saw like a priest in his outfit was when I was in Jerusalem, because you go through the Armenian quarter to get to the Jewish quarter. If you're going through the Jaffa gate, those of you who know what I'm talking about. You pass through the Armenian Quarter, and there's a church over there, and they wear an outfit just like this. I think it's like red and black, but they wear the avne, they wear the sash, and it's pretty long. I probably should have stopped and talked to him, but I didn't. Moving along. So that's the tzitz. A very interesting idea about the tzitz, by the way, a very Hasidic idea. Chassidus very much talks about the struggle that we have after prayer. Yeah, let's say you're very inspired, you feel very inspired. Prayer should be in that way. It should feel very inspiring on a certain high. But then reality sets in as soon as it's over, and the rush of getting to work and looking at your phone and dealing with this and dealing with that, it's just like it brings you down so much. And in fact, I remember in yeshiva, they would talk about Bachrim, students that wouldn't really try to daven, try to pray in a proper way, because the highs were so high and the lows were so low that even, you feel very inspired, and I feel like I'm connecting to Hashem and I'm connecting to God. But then like reality sets in, and reality, the regular the mundane, you got to go to the mundane right away, and you fall so hard and you fall so strong that it was very discouraging. The tzitz, according to Chassidus, is the solution to that problem. What is the tzitz? The tzitz is a one-liner. You need like a one-line slogan that when you walk away from prayer, you walk away from an inspirational moment. You should walk away with a one-liner that you can take with you for the rest of the day, and it should be your guide, your lighthouse that you can always run back to and look at to keep you focused and not feeling that the mundane. You quickly throw everything off and you get completely consumed by the mundane. But if you have this one-liner in the back of your pocket or in front of you, really, or on the top of your forehead, the place where the control center, it makes your day. You remain in a very holy day. I was just bringing with a friend of mine, a millennial rabbi, you know who he is, Daniel Bortz. He gave us a class one time. So we have a chavrusa every day in Mishnayos. We learn Mishnah every single day. And we were talking about how you go to a real fabrengen, a real Hasidic gathering, and it'll be 4 or 5 hours, and it's incredible. But there are so many good lines and so many good gems that people said, and all of it just kind of like falls to the wayside because you can't remember everything. Now, I actually take notes, unless it's Shabbos, obviously, but I take notes so I'll remember. That it all fall down. And one time he was saying that he goes, I went to a fabrengen and I stayed for 10 minutes. And I started to walk out, and my friend, another friend of his, started yelling at him, "Oh, what's wrong with you? Why you're leaving the fabrengen too early?" And he said, this is it. I just have this one line, and this is all I need for the week. Why do I need to hear 50 lines? I don't need to constantly feel inspired. I don't need every moment to be a new line and something new, but just to focus on one inspirational line, and as we call it, unpacking in Chassidus. I say, you unpack it. That's enough. And that's the idea of the tzitz. To take away that one-liner. You can wear it on the top of your head. But the Rebbe would often say, if there's somebody that like inspires you, that you look up to, you should call them to mind. Yeah, you're in a situation, whatever's going on, you need a moment of confidence. You call that face to mind. Bring that face to mind up into your forehead, as it was called, and it'll carry you out. It'll schlep you out. On the hem over here were these bells. When the Kohen Gadol was walking around, it would be these bells. It would be these ringing bells. So there was no the Kohen Gadol couldn't tiptoe his way out of anything. From here, there's a fantastic little Gemara. I just want to share it with you. I wrote it. I had it a little bit as a medrash. It says Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said 4 things. There are 4 things which the Holy One, blessed be He, states that he dislikes. What were they? Avodah Zarah. Let's see if I remember them. Avodah Zarah, adultery, murder, and what was the other one? It'll come to me in a second. I'm sorry. There are 3 things. Avodah Zarah, adultery, idol worship, adultery, and murder. Hashem really dislikes those. But he said, I have a 4th. What is that? when someone who enters a house suddenly, someone who doesn't knock on the door before they enter. I have that issue. And he says, where do we learn that you should do that? Because when the Kohen Gadol would walk around, it would notify you. He would notify you that he's coming, so that you would be ready. You'd be ready to act properly. It says the one who enters a house suddenly is one who enters. The Torah says one who enters one. It's a sin to enter one's house suddenly. You shouldn't just barge into your own house. How much more so when you go into someone else's house? And we see that by the Kohen Gadol, when he would walk around, he would sound a bell to let you know, so that you wouldn't feel frightened. You wouldn't feel sudden. People would have time to get themselves together. I always thought that was a shmakel. A very good line. I have this issue that my close friends that just walk into their house.
I also
yeah.
I have read somewhere from Kabbalistic or there's another representation for the noises for Jewish people who have not repented yet, or they're being noisy or doubtful, and the noise basically also represents that the offering is for those for those Jewish people. Is that something accurate or no?
I don't know. No, that very well could be right. I don't recall that though.
I think I will remember where I read that. I'll send it to you.
Sure. Thank you very much. The Torah goes on and concludes talking about the altar. So inside the Holy of Holies, for those of you that joined us last week, inside the Beis HaMikdash, inside the holy and the temple and the sanctuary and the tabernacle, you ever seen that dome? There was like this dome over there called the Heichal or Kodesh, and inside on the south side you would have the menorah, and on the north side you would have the bread, which we spoke about. The bread is for wealth. That's why the Torah says if you want wealth, then we always pray towards Jerusalem. So in this case we pray east, but you should face your head a little bit towards the north, because the north side is considered the wealthy side, so to speak. Excuse me. And if you want wisdom, where the menorah was, the menorah represented wisdom, like you spoke about last week, you should face your head slightly south. So you face east, but you move it slightly south, you can have wisdom. To your south, also to your north, you had the incense, where they would burn the incense. And it says about the incense, it was a small altar. You shall make an altar for burning of the incense, and it should be made out of shittim wood, like all the wood, acacia wood. And you shall overlay it with pure gold. Some things were made with gold overlaid, and some things were not made with gold overlay. And Reish Lakish says in the Gemara, who is Reish Lakish? You guys remember? He was a robber. He was Rabbi Gamliel's brother-in-law. He saw his brother-in-law and thought it was a woman, a beautiful woman. And he jumped after her. Turns out it was a man. And it was a good opening conversation. Rabbi Gamliel said, "Hey, I can see you're very powerful. You're very intelligent. You should become I'll give you my sister, who's also she looks just like me." Literally, that's what he said. Looks, if you think I'm beautiful, wait till you see what she looks like. You can marry her, but you have to learn Torah under me, which Reish Lakish then agreed. He was a total robber. He was a bandit. He was a cowboy. He was a pirate. And he ended up becoming one of the greatest sages of all time, with a very tragic ending. But he says like this. He says about the fires of hell, fires of Gehenna have no power over even those who transgress. Because it says about the golden altar, the altar that we're speaking about right now, the altar of the incense. If the golden altar, in which the layer of gold over the wood was as thick as a dinar coin, was as thick as like a penny, very, very thin. And what happened? It lasted for many years. There was fire that would consume the gold. Yeah, there was a fire on the altar, but it never melted. It never altered the little tiny thin gold overlay over the Mizbeach. If it was able to last for many years without any sort of had no power over it because of the fire, how much more so is it true of the transgressors of the Jewish people? who are full of good deeds, as a pomegranate is full of seeds. Classic line that a Jew is filled with mitzvahs, as a seed is filled with pomegranates. And there's a famous, which means we're very full. You ever open up a pomegranate? I don't know. In America, we don't eat pomegranate so much, but maybe we eat pomegranate juice. It's very expensive. I don't know who buys that. It's like $8. But you open it up, there's hundreds of seeds it seems like inside of a pomegranate. And it says a Jew is filled with mitzvahs just as much as a pomegranate is filled with seeds. And so the Satmar Rebbe once came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and says, I don't understand this line. How could a sinner of the Jewish people, how could a sinner, a horrible person, a sinner, be filled with mitzvahs as much as a pomegranate is filled with seeds? And the Rebbe said, my question's the other way. How could someone who's filled with mitzvahs, he asked, how could a sinner be called, how could a Jew be called okay, look, how did it go? I'm trying to translate it from the Yiddish. Okay, so he asked him, how could he possibly be called? How could a sinner be filled with pomegranate mitzvahs like a pomegranate is filled with seeds? Says the Satmar Rebbe. The Rebbe says, how could he? My question is the opposite. How could someone who's filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate is filled with seeds be called a sinner? Does that make sense? In other words, the Rebbe saw it the other way. The guy's filled with mitzvahs. How could we possibly call him a sinner? As opposed to the other guy said, he's a sinner. How could be called a guy who's filled with mitzvahs? The Rebbe always looked at everything at the other way around. The Talmud and Eruvin. And with that, I think I will leave it. I mean, there's like tons more to talk about, but we don't really have much time. Does anybody have any questions? I see I have a question over here. The ephod is like the apron. What did I say? Yeah, the ephod is like an apron. And the me'il is the tunic.
Yeah, I think actually my comment come from, it was from this Shabbat Parsha Teruma.
Yeah.
I think it's in the Chumash actually. I read, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm gonna find it. I believe it was in the Chumash somewhere. And you know where they have like classic questions and everything in Chabad Chumash.
Yeah, the Gutnick one. Yeah, is it in there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really use that one. So. I
guess it's just interesting concept.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, for sure. Let me know. Okay, with that, I think we'll conclude. Tomorrow we'll have Chassidus, we'll have Tanya class, followed by Pirkei Avos, and I wish you all a good night. Enjoy.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Sure.